Hey there, internet friends, and welcome to That D Plus Show. Class is in session for the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right from the name. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and each week we dive into a different Disney Plus offering and discuss its history, how it holds up today, and our general impressions. This show is made possible entirely by the support of our patrons over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. So if you like the show and you can support us over there, we would definitely appreciate it. But if you can't, no big deal. The fact that you're listening is awesome. And of course, we would love it if you like, subscribe, rate, review, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. Joining me today, we have Frank Bazzani back on the show. How you doing, Frank?
I'm doing great. I'm happy, excited to dive in and finally talk about What If a little bit deeper with you.
Indeed, yes. Today is going to be all about Marvel's What If, specifically because we are kicking off our Halloween 2021 month of That D Plus show. We're going to focus primarily on the zombies episode here, but we'll talk about pretty much everything up to episode 9, which is the last episode that has aired as we are sitting down recording this. So everything but the finale of Marvel's What If. But yeah, we'll kind of focus largely on, and a lot of the stats and stuff I pulled are specifically for the zombies episode. But so before we dive in, just kind of general thoughts of the series as a whole, Frank, especially you. I've been watching week to week. You were watching and then you kind of fell behind a little bit, but then you've kind of like played catch up in the last week or so. So what have you thought of the series so far?
I've been a little bit like middling on it. From the start, I haven't really loved it, and I think it has gotten better as it's gone on for the most part. And especially with some of the ideas and just even the execution of the ideas in the episodes. But I it just like it hasn't since it's MCU and since there's a certain level of quality there, it definitely they have me and I've been interested, but even I lost like interest and I kind of like you said fell behind, and that's the first time I've done that for one of these Marvel like Disney Plus shows
Mm-hmm.
where like I've been so excited and so there like every day, and I fell behind on 1 week of Loki, and it was like trying to avoid spoilers, and then I got to watch 2 episodes in a row and it was great, but this like doesn't have that same vibe for me. Even when I watch like sit down and watch multiple episodes in a row to get caught up, it was ends in more of a disappointment than it typically ends in like excitement or like that I can't wait for what's going to happen next. At least for me.
Yeah, I'm probably largely in the same boat. Well, even though I've been like keeping up with it week to week, it has been like a mix of, or like it's ebbed and flowed on when I'm gonna stay up and watch this like when it hits at midnight versus I'm tired. I'm not gonna miss out on that much if I wait and watch it in the morning or something like that. I think the latest I've done is like, I watched one like on a Wednesday afternoon, the day it came out or something like that. And I I love the idea behind What If, of like, hey, let's do these fun, crazy hypotheticals and just see how that spins out from storytelling with like compared to the stories we know. I think there's a lot of fun in that. And I think some of the topics in particular that they've hit on, I think have been like really cool and really like interesting, especially in like, that like the second episode, for example, of like, what if like, T'Challa became a Star-Lord or whatever. It's like,
Yeah.
that is such a weird idea for like a what if kind of like theory, and the way it's executed of like, the Ravengers just pick up the wrong kid from the planet, from a planet of everything. They pick up like one of the few other kids we would have known from that time or something like that. And how that spins out and how T'Challa as a Ravenger kind of like changes the course of events. Certainly like a fascinating kind of take on it that I never would have like thought of otherwise. Like the what if the first episode, the what if Peggy Carter took the serum instead. I'm like, that's a cool idea, and I really liked how that one kind of spun off too. And then you have other ones that are just like the one we're going over today. Like, what if zombies? And it's like they clearly had the idea for zombies first, and we're like, okay, so how do we back into that story? And the idea of like, let's say it's Janet Van Dyne in the quantum realm picks up this zombie virus or whatever, and so they can set it basically Ant-Man and the Wasp into Infinity War, and we get like the beginning touchstone of that, and then like just spinning out completely into a zombie movie from there. Certainly an interesting idea that, you know, it may be hit or miss on execution ultimately. And so like when it was just pitched as that idea of like it's going to be an anthology series and each episode's going to be like its own little story, I was like, oh, that's really cool. I would be very interested to see some of these stories, like what's the next chapter of some of these stories. And early on, some of the news kind of speculated that like, oh, like season 2 will do that. Like, you know, oh, we're going to keep coming back to Peggy Carter and Agent Carter for or Captain Carter for like, you know, a touchstone in season 2 or something like that. I'm like, okay, cool. So like the first episode we got was basically like Peggy Carter version of Captain America, the first Avenger, and now we'll get to see what Peggy Carter in like the Avengers era looks like in a season 2 or something. Cool. And now that we're here at like the tail end of the first season, and they have like threaded the or, like, not threaded the needle, but like confirmed that hey, these things are going to be tying together, and you know, like presumably going into the finale next week, we're going to have characters from each of these other episodes plucked from their universes to face off against Ultron here. It's like, okay, that makes some of my issues that I've had with some of the episodes a little bit better, but I think much like I think a lot of people had like a similar issue with WandaVision. The people who didn't like the TV centric episodes of WandaVision, like the eras of television, and were just like, how, like, get to the action. How does this tie into the, like the larger narrative and stuff like that? People who like wanted to kind of like blow past those first 4 or 5 episodes to get to like what's really going on in that town. I feel like this is the closest I felt to like those people of like, we had to sit
For
through
sure.
like 7 to 8 episodes to get to this is what this whole series has been leading up to, because all the rest of them have had the framework of like, this is just this story and this story is done now, or this story is done and leaves, you know, a chapter open for the next thing, or we're not going to finish telling this story, which is my biggest issue with some of these episodes, including the zombies one. Like, we're not going to finish telling the story because maybe it'll be like, we'll come back and tell like the end beat of this story in the final episode of the season or something like that. And I just don't think that's a great approach to storytelling. Like my preferred like stories are the Captain Carter one, where it ends very definitively in the same way that like the first Avenger ends, where she's done, she fought off Hydra, she saved Steve, and then like there's that coda of getting sucked forward into time. Cool. So now we can see chapter 2 of her story, these adventures. But this episode in particular, the zombies one, where it's like, hey, we're gonna very much do a send up of zombie movies, but we're only gonna give you like the first 2 acts of a zombie movie, and then like they're gonna head off to get that cure for Act 3, and the episode's just gonna end. And it's like, what the like, that's, how do you do that? That's frustrating for me. And you and I were talking, I think, right before we started kind of recording, that like the immediate following episode of What If Killmonger Saved Tony Stark is kind of the same thing, where it's like, here's 2 acts of a 3-act structure, but you're gonna have to wait for Act 3 some other time. So what if
Yeah,
you? Yeah, go ahead.
no, I agree with a lot of that. And for me, like I watched the zombie episode, the Killmonger episode, and the Thor party episode, just like back to back to back, kind of like we were talking about. And like with the zombies episode, I was getting into it and I was like, okay, I'm actually into this one and like what they're doing and the premise, and just they're having a good time with it. And I really liked seeing a lot of these characters interact with each other, especially because I realized like, yeah, some of these characters don't ever really get to hang out or talk with each other in like the MCU movies, or maybe they've had like passing words. So it's cool to see like more deeper interactions with them and like kind of this squad that they form of characters that like you never normally like see together.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's kind of to your point though, then it just kind of ends, and then, or like it's kind of sets up for some stuff and then ends. And then I think that's like with then the Killmonger episode does the same thing. And so that was like just a double punch of like you leaving one episode disappointed getting invested into another story where like, because I love Killmonger and I love Tony Stark, and so I thought that was a great episode. And then that was even to worse to me, where it sets up and then just ends.
Yeah.
Like, because there's literally that scene with like these two characters at the end where they're like, all right, so we got to do this, right? And they're like, yeah, and then it's like credits, and I was like, oh my
Yeah.
god,
What?
like,
Yeah. What blue balls? Um,
yeah,
yeah. Very, very frustrating on that front. And I very much hope that if they're paying attention to kind of like feedback for an eventual season 2, I hope that like they take that to heart and say like, okay, yeah, I guess we do need to kind of like tell each episode needs to be its own standalone story instead of part of a standalone story and then like a tease for what might come next. Because yeah, that's certainly I think one of the weakest elements of this series. What do you think about the? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
sorry, I wish they kind of had just went more with that direction where they were just more like anthology and totally disconnected.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a bit, like I say, it's a bit apples and oranges, but like I enjoyed Star Wars Visions a lot more, and I kind of wish they had went more in that direction for
Mm-hmm.
like what if could have been. But because like for me at least, I was like, I didn't need these to all like try to tie together or end in like a bigger thing. I could have just enjoyed all of these stories as their own like things,
Yeah.
and that's just for my perspective on it at least.
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, you're not alone in making that comparison, of course. And I wonder how many people would make that comparison if it wasn't for like the proximity of those two series of the fact that
Yeah.
Visions is dropping in the middle of this series. Because yeah, I think what's great about Visions that we talked about a little bit when we did that episode. Okay, was it just 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
Was the idea that. No, it was just last week, right? It's all a blur.
Yeah, I think so.
Time
yeah,
is
it
a
feels
blur.
like 2 years ago.
But the idea that like, yeah, each of those things is a complete standalone. Like, they were basically giving like carte blanche of like, hey, you don't need to like abide by canon or anything like that. None like, just go tell a cool story in the Star Wars universe using like the Star Wars iconography. And yeah, I would love like to have seen a variation of that, and much like I think we talked about a little bit on the Star Wars Visions thing, as well as I've heard other people say it, like there are certain episodes of that series that I would love to see spin off into their own thing. Like I would
Yeah, absolutely.
love for both of these to be like potential backdoor pilots of like, hey, let's do a whole 10 episode arc of Captain Carter and just see the kinds of adventures she can have. Make it kind of like maybe you have like a weird like she lines up with Agent Carter from the live action series or something like that. Do some cool fun thing with that. Same with some of these other like ideas would be potentially really cool to see. Like, let's see, instead of just being confined to a 30-minute version of this story, let's see let's actually like really spin out what if and see kind of the details and how even those smallest little flap of those butterfly wings have crazy ramifications across the universe. Similarly to like, yeah, some of those the Visions kind of standalone things, I would gladly see another 5 episodes on this character or the idea that they set up in this particular episode or something like that. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see where What If goes from here, both in terms of like the finale next week, but also the eventual they've all but confirmed it in how openly they've been talking about it, the idea of a season 2. Like I completely expect next episode to basically end with like the Guardians of the Multiverse will return or something like that. Just in the same way that like Shang-Chi ends with like the 10 rings will return, like and many of the Marvel movies before have been like such and such will return. But yeah, let's dive into a little bit of the history lesson before we talk about some of our real favorite moments and stuff of zombies and the series as a whole. So why do we pick it? Of course, as I said, is kicking off our Halloween month. We got a fun little collection of weird grab bag things that'll be Halloween themed in the next few weeks. History lesson. This episode in particular originally aired a few weeks ago, September 8th, 2021. The runtime of the series is about 30 minutes per episode, a little bit over. In the Marvel timeline of things, we had Loki that ran back in June to July. We had Black Widow that came out in July. We have What If that started in August and is running through October, technically. I have September here in the doc because I'm an idiot. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings came out earlier this month here in September. And Eternals is going to be coming out November 2021. And then just to round out the year, we have the Hawkeye series that's going to be coming out November and December. And then Spider-Man No Way Home going to be wrapping us up December 2021. The director of this particular episode, Brian Andrews, he's also the director, I believe, of every episode of this series. He's the credited director. As a director, other animated series he's worked on were Men in Black, the series, as well as Jackie Chan Adventures.
Oh hell yeah!
And but his real the real shining star of his credits is he's worked on as a storyboard artist on a lot of the MCU movies. Starting back with he's I believe uncredited for Iron Man 2, and then his first formally accredited one is the Avengers, and then has worked on probably half the movies since then as a storyboard artist. So clearly knows these characters, knows their designs, and I think that I was like, oh, that makes a ton of sense on why this guy that hasn't really done a lot of directing, so to speak, since the 90s or maybe early 2000s is getting a shot at this entire series. The writers we have as the head writer of the series, A.C. Bradley. He wrote one episode of Arrow, specifically I believe was the Birds of Prey episode. He has also been a writer for the series Troll Hunters, Tales of Arcadia, and Three Below, Tales of Arcadia, which I was like, I have no idea what those are. And I looked them up. They are a DreamWorks Netflix animated series that was created by Guillermo del Toro.
Wow, okay.
So you can go watch, whatever weirdness Guillermo del Toro throughout, and DreamWorks was like, yes, we will go ahead and make that. And AC Bradley was the writer on those. And the writer of this particular episode, the Zombies episode, Matthew Chauncey, also wrote on Three Below, Tales of Arcadia with AC Bradley. Starring, we have Jeffrey Wright here as the Watcher, who I first remember seeing in Angels in America because I'm a big old theater nerd. I believe that was an HBO miniseries based on the plays of the same name by Tony Kushner back in the early aughts, maybe. I have it somewhere. I have the DVD of it somewhere on my DVD shelf behind me. He also has been in the recent Bond movies, starting with Casino Royale, playing Felix something. I'm sure
Felix Leiter.
There you go. I knew if you didn't have it, I'm sure Logan would have screamed it at the wherever he's listening to this podcast. He was also Beatty in the Hunger Games films, which I was like, oh, that was a good casting, and I remember enjoying him in that. More recently, he has been in Westworld. He was also Isaac in The Last of Us Part 2 last year.
Oh, okay. Nice.
And he is going to be playing Commissioner Gordon in the upcoming The Batman with Robert Pattinson. A whole bunch of the rest of these that I have are basically they're the actors that are portraying their roles, which is a cool thing I think with this series is the fact that they were able to get so many of the big Hollywood names back for this. It's cool. Hit or miss on whether or not they can actually do voice action. But, we have Mark Ruffalo playing Bruce Banner and the Hulk, who's been in the MCU since the Avengers. Chadwick Boseman in one of his final roles here as T'Challa / Black Panther, having been in the MCU since Captain America Civil War. Paul Bettany as Vision in the MCU since Iron Man in his Jarvis days. Sebastian Stan as Bucky, having been in the MCU since the Captain America, the First Avenger. Evangeline Lilly and Paul Rudd as Hope Van Dyne and Scott Lang, both in the MCU since Ant-Man, of course. Jon Favreau playing Happy Hogan, of course, also back in there since Iron Man, and also, the director of the original Iron Man, so, kicking off the MCU really properly. Denai Guerrera playing Okoye, having been in the MCU since Black Panther. Emily Van Camp as Sharon Carter in the MCU since Captain America: The Winter Soldier. And then one of just the weird, like, random people that I think you kind of alluded to, of like, oh, the weird mixing and matching that you get in episodes like this one. David Dastmalchian, most recently playing Polka Dot Man in The Suicide Squad, but here is reprising his role as Kurt, one of Scott Lang's crew from the Ant-Man movies, in just like the weirdest little, like, yeah, let's throw in like a normal non-superhero guy too. Yeah, just
Well,
fun little
we
bit.
know they have to. The backbone of the Avengers is just a normal human guy.
Yeah.
Like, you have to have just a human guy there.
Yeah, there you go. And here we got two. We got Happy and we got Kurt. We also have in a very brief like reprise of his role, Tom Von Lawler, reprising his role as Ebony Maw, who's technically been playing that role since Avengers Infinity War. And then we have a couple of the kind of like stunt casted role, or the opposite of stunt casting. Hey, we couldn't get the real talent, so here's the actors that we hired to replace these. Hudson Thames, maybe, or Thames, playing Peter Parker / SpiderMan, taking over the role from Tom Holland for this. Didn't have really much of anything of note in his TV and film history, but he has, about 30 credits on IMDb. The one that like caught my eye was like, oh, he was in Mad Men, but he's also a young guy. And so like him being in Mad Men in like 2013, I was like, oh, he was probably like a kid in an episode or something like that.
Yeah.
Is probably who he was in Mad Men. And then we have Josh Keaton on the other end of the spectrum, playing Steve Rogers and Captain America, very briefly, because I'm like, we barely get anything from Steve Rogers in this, but he's also played him in a couple of the other episodes of the series. He has been covered in this episode, or in this series, before at least once, because I believe I mentioned him in Hercules, where he played the voice of young Hercules way back in 1997. And then he has done a lot of miscellaneous video game and cartoon work since then, including Ocelot in Metal Gear Solid 3, Snake Eater.
Hell yeah.
He played Norman Osborn in the most recent Spider-Man animated series that was from 2017 to 2020. He was Ant-Man in Avengers Assemble, 2017 through 2019. I think that's another place that he has come up on this particular That D Plus Show series, back when I did an episode of Avengers Assemble, or maybe two. And then he was also Ant-Man in Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3, The Black Order. So those were some of the... I was like, hey, he's cast alongside some of those other characters in this one, but playing as Steve Rogers. And I wonder if I guess he's probably also the zombie Steve Rogers that we get, the brief scene of, even though he's probably not saying much. Surprisingly, a lot of trivia on IMDb, specifically just for this episode. In the original Marvel Zombies comic series, the undead heroes and villains alike retained their ability to talk, think, and show remorse for their actions. However, when they have the hunger for human flesh, they become more primal. In the MCU's version, the undead heroes hardly have the ability to speak normally or think logically aside from wanting to feed on human flesh. They resemble more so like actual zombies depicted in Hollywood cinema. However, they do retain their abilities. Scarlet Witch, Doctor Strange, Wong, and Ebony Maw, we see them kind of all using their powers. And then others retain their knowledge of how to fight using their weapons, a la the Falcon and Iron Man and Captain America and Hawkeye and the Wasp and Hank Pym. Yep. The Black Panther being held prisoner by Vision as a food source for zombie Wakanda, for zombie Scarlet Witch / Wanda Maximoff, is kind of a direct reference to the same thing happening in the Marvel Zombies comics, only instead of being used as food for Wanda, he's used as food for Hank Pym, because Hank Pym kidnaps Black Panther and kind of uses it himself, because again, their faculties are a little bit better. Scott Lang's Head in a Jar is a nod to the first Marvel Zombies comic book as well, where Janet Van Dyne's zombie head is put into a jar and, quote, restored as a functioning normal human by the Acolytes. I also love seeing it because I think of the series Futurama. Yeah. This episode has the first MCU mention of Uncle Ben. However, he's yet to appear in the live-action series of the MCU. And he also doesn't appear in this. He's just kind of name-checked for the first time. Hope Van Dyne kills zombie Sharon Carter by expanding from the Wasp size to normal size inside her body. This is possibly a reference to the fan theory that was popular after the release of Avengers Infinity War and before Avengers Endgame came out, that would have Scott Lang killing Thanos by expanding inside him that's what the IMDb trivia says. Notably leaving out the part that everybody wanted him to go up Thanos' butt and then expand. The ending suggests that zombie Thanos still needs the Mind Stone to snap his fingers, just like in Infinity War, hinting that this episode is not over and ends on a cliffhanger. However, this is not likely, as the Watcher declares it as the end of the universe. But I think I think that bit of trivia was probably written before this most recent episode. There's also another one I pulled it, or I didn't put in here, but I remember seeing that I thought about when I rewatched the episode today. The beginning of like Peter's kind of like rules to survive the zombie apocalypse thing has a little like zombie cardboard cutout guy being like brains or whatever, and it's seems like it's a pretty clear nod to the like end card logo from Joss Whedon's like projects like Buffy and Angel, and I think like the Avengers probably has it too, where it's just the like the little cardboard or paper guy being like rah, rah, or whatever. So yep. So yeah, now that that's all out of the way, diving specifically into this episode, what things did you like or not like about it? We've already covered a couple of them, but feel free to reiterate or expand, Frank.
I feel like for this one, I just kind of have a couple random things.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the ones I actually did like was the way that they had used Spider-Man to build like a hideout. Like they had all the subway cars like up in the skyscrapers, and they were kind of all webbed together. I know it's kind of just a quick thing you see, and then they're like in the hideout. But I was still like, that's a really cool idea for like how they've been surviving and like where their camp is. It's like away from all the zombies because they're just like up in the sky.
Yeah. No, I agree. And that like there are a lot of like cool little clever ideas like that in here. To kind of explain away like why the whole world has basically just died in the 2 weeks since Ant-Man and the Wasp seemingly. But I do like that. Yeah, it's like, okay, yep, here's how they got by. Like, and they have like a weird sense of fun about it too. Like the whole orientation video really as a whole of
Yeah.
like he roped Happy into like wearing long sleeve or wearing a t-shirt to say, hey, like here's the rules of the zombies. If they bite you, like, yeah, you're going to turn into a zombie, which is of course the necessary setup that you need to establish the zombie rule for later. But then also the like just also they're attracted to the smell of human flesh, so stay clean. And it's just this cutaway to like Bucky in the shower. It's like, what how whose idea was that the pitch for? It's like, all right, well, I mean, do your thing, Marvel. Like, but yeah, it's just like that's a interesting choice. But I love that Bucky's like, I will kill you, Kurt, who I don't even know and did not know before this. There's also an element where I'm like, how did Kurt get from San Francisco to New York?
Oh yeah.
During all this, like, how did that happen? But whatever. Just suspension of disbelief. If I'm fine accepting that everybody else is a zombie, I suppose I can accept that he somehow, was able to get there, or they picked him up and took him there, or something like that.
He was on vacation.
And it is just like the fact that he, like, I think you mentioned earlier, like the idea of like just the random people that this matches up is a lot of fun. The fact that pretty much like our A-list stars are taken out right out the gate as soon as they try and help. They get sidelined by Hank Pym in ant form.
Well, that's also a really cool moment where you have that thing where they all like step off the jet and get their like hero shot, and then it just get mauled. And I like the explanation when he's like, and that's when it was over because then the Avengers were zombies now.
Yep. So what chance did the rest of us have? Yeah. Except, give it like Black Panther is in that scene getting off the Quinjet, and he manages to survive okay for a little while there. So, obviously, I think he's helped slash hurt by Vision, in doing so. But, um, yeah, as somebody who admittedly avoid zombie movies largely because I'm just not a big horror movie guy and scary movie guy. Like I appreciate that this does have like a lot of the touchstones of a zombie movie and like realizes it has the touchstones of a zombie movie and so is commenting on them. It's very Zombieland-esque in that regard
Mhm.
almost, of the idea of like, as soon as somebody suggests splitting up, Peter's just like do you even watch movies? Like, no, we shouldn't be splitting up, and they do it and then they come back and say, you're right, we should not have split up. Or the whole like, don't jinx it, no, you jinxed it, ah crap. Like I enjoy that they continue that thread of like Peter being a movie nerd,
Yeah.
to like help explain that and comment on those ideas. But again, like my biggest issue with this episode is it gives you the setup of a zombie movie and then like the big like showdown of a zombie movie, but doesn't give you the resolution of a zombie movie. So it's missing like
Yeah.
the key element there of like what's going to happen when they show up in Wakanda. Like, is Wakanda really, taken over and it's just like everybody's dead? There's like somehow if Thanos got there and is already zombified and like waiting for, the Mind Stone to show up, like like how did he become a zombie? Because I guess there's also the element of like he needed to get the minds or the time stone at some point, which theoretically would have still been on Zombie Strange at the beginning of
Mhm.
this episode. So
Because
like
that's what they would have been going for, right? Because they were going there to get Strange,
I mean like the
or like I assume, or
so
right?
so
Like,
the beginning of Infinity War, the time stone and the Mind Stone are on Earth.
mm,
Strange has the time stone and then like gets on board the ship, and like that's where yeah, that's why Ebony Maw and the other guy shows up, is to get the time stone from Strange. Um, but like clearly that's I guess already gone at this point because they
yeah,
disintegrate Strange. So yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, oh, they didn't really explain how Thanos gets the time stone, or how the time stone factored into that. But because like in the movie he gets it of course on Titan when like
yeah,
Strange gives it to him basically, and then Thanos needs to go and get the Mind Stone as like the to complete the set. Um, so he can get all the other ones without dealing with zombies on Earth, as he would during the original movie. But yeah, so it's definitely weird, and like I'm curious if they'll like try and close the loop on that in the next episode. I definitely don't think they'll explain away how he got the time stone because I think that's
yeah,
just a like just ignore that. We're pushing that aside, or maybe it just was on the ground after the ants eat zombie Doctor Strange and they didn't think to pick it up. I don't, maybe that's what
yeah,
happens, and so maybe that's how Thanos got it. But he's clearly also a zombie by the time
yeah.
he's at Wakanda. So we'll see what maybe we'll see what happens there, or maybe it will just be like a well, nope, that's you just didn't get an ending to that story, which is frustrating. But it is fun seeing like the just the B-list kind of characters or the like the
Mhm.
supporting characters in a lot of these movies like take center stage, I guess,
Yeah,
for this. Obviously like Bucky, and even like Bruce slash Hulk, because of the deals and stuff, hasn't had his own like standalone lead movie. He's been a supporting role in a bunch of the others. Um, and that's like pretty much like Spider-Man is really the only like lead role character we've had. I guess Hope as well a little bit. Um, but yeah, it's interesting seeing like Happy. I do like the blam 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 blam,
yeah,
and then kind of calling them out, and then even Zombie Happy being like blam blam. It's like okay, that's a cute little payoff. Um, yeah. Did you have any favorite like deaths or like or kills like zombie kills?
The favorite that comes to mind is another one of the moments I was gonna mention too, and it's when because Bucky fights Cap in,
Hmm.
like, the train car,
Yeah.
And that's always anything with Cap is always usually a great fight. And I really love that when he's like, I don't want to fight you, Cap. Like,
Mhm.
and then he's like, but when he throws the shield and he just like cleaves him totally in half, I was like, that's great. Like
Yeah.
that, and that's the kind of thing you could only get because this is like animated,
Yeah.
know?
It's animated and it's not going to be blood coming out of a zombie or whatever. It's
Yeah.
it does I also love that moment, and it's immediately what I think of when I think of like the cool death in this. I like it's that and the Wong portal, like cutting off Wong's own
Yeah.
head, I think is
Yeah.
a fun one, especially because I'm a big fan of the series How It Should Have Ended
Mm,
on YouTube, animated series where they, kind of say like, here's what really should have happened or something. And I'm pretty sure in the one specifically for like Infinity War, they basically do that where it's like Wong opens the portal and then closes it to slice off Thanos' arm. It's like Wong. And it's just like, yeah, no, that would absolutely do it. By
yeah.
what we've learned. Because we see him do that with one of the other Black Order characters earlier in the film. We see him just like chop off his arm. Um, so I love that like that gets a little nod basically in this. But yeah, the Captain America one is fun, but it also poses the question that I always have in terms of like how the shield works,
Oh
because
yeah.
there are people that like the shield just bounces off of them, no problem, or maybe it knocks them out or something like that, or kicks them back. But then there are other times where like in especially in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, when like somebody throws that shield and it gets lodged into like the drywall of a building or something like that. It's like, okay, so we just saw it get lodged into the drywall of a building, but then later when somebody throws it at like Zemo, it just like knocks him out. It's like, no, pretty sure it would have like decapitated him.
Oh yeah.
And so here we see it like cleaving, flesh and bone in two basically. It's like, yeah, that seems more likely than what we occasionally see in the MCU. Um,
I
but yeah.
I always just tried to think of it too. It was like I think it's just like how much power they put behind it, and
Mhm.
especially the thing with Cap is like he is super strong,
Yeah.
but I imagine he is like pulling his punches a lot of the time, especially if it's like, oh, I need this guy alive. I mean, the real answer is it does whatever they need it to do, but
Exactly. Because it's like, okay,
like
yeah, if he's pulling his punch, well, then it wouldn't bounce back at him with such force either. Like
yeah,
it would like maybe hit him and then kind of like like the fact that the shield works as a boomerang as
oh
much as
yeah,
it does and stuff like it's the
you
shield
could just
physics are just never.
perfectly
Yeah. They
catch it over your like extended arm because there's
yeah.
two like things to hold on to, and it's just like
Yeah. Yeah, never really like has logic behind it. Or he is just a master of physics, and
yeah,
could give like Neil deGrasse Tyson a run for his money or something like that. But I also love the Cap and Bucky scene there because it has like, nice little nods to their history, including like
yeah.
the I guess this is the end of the line, pal. As a callback to the "I'm with you" to the end of the line banter that they have previously. Um, I also like like even earlier in Grand Central Station where Okoye basically like slices Falcon in two. And she's
Oh
like,
yeah.
"That was your friend. I'm sorry." And this obviously would take place before all of the Falcon and Winter Soldier stuff. So he's like, "I should be sad, but I'm not." I think that's a fun little nod to the history of those characters because they would have been more at odds really at that time. Um, yeah, it's there are a lot of fun moments in here, and I
Yeah.
do love like the reveal of Vision like being immune to this, but also like illogically not helping people and like like luring people. It's that like that. I mean, that's another trope of like luring people into a trap, a la like it's I mean it's very much The Last of Us, like, oh, humans are the real villains or something like that. And in this case it's
Yeah.
like, oh, Vision's really the the worst of the worst because he could stop this and he doesn't because of his love for Wanda, and refusal to like let her go. um
And I kind of like the extra layer where like he can save other people, but he can't save Wanda
yeah.
because like Wanda is like powerful and he can't like get through that, and like that's like another messed up layer where he's like he could save literally everybody, and he's just like, no, but the person I want to save, I can't.
Yeah. It's also a nice little role reversal to Infinity War even,
Mm,
where like their fate is still clearly intertwined, and like she in Infinity War obviously like she has to kill him even though she really doesn't want to, and and here he still like dies, but he does it himself this time around.
mhm.
Which is extra fascinating when we see by episode 8, the one that just aired, how efficiently the Mind Stone could have taken care of Thanos if
God,
anybody had
yeah.
thought to use it that way. Um, but oh well. I like if people are like, I have an issue with like how quickly he dispatched. I'm like, well, A, it's storytelling, whatever. Like, get over it.
Yeah.
But B, like Ultron using that is a very different being than like Vision and the humanity that Vision has using it.
Mm.
Like Ultron, yeah, he's a genocidal maniac, so he has no problem doing that, versus Vision would not think to like use his beam as a weapon immediately in that way, especially if like, the universe is at stake and the other ideas have been introduced. Yeah. Anyway. Um any other highlights from this one? What did you think of Scott Lang just having like an endless run of quips as the head in a jar?
I didn't mind it. Like it's like that's always who he is. He's always like Scott's always the one that's just there making jokes, and
Hmm.
like I typically enjoy a lot of that. And if anything, honestly, it probably works better in a cartoon, like
Yeah,
especially with
yeah,
their like super fast pacing and his delivery and stuff. Like, so if anything, it probably lands better in like in this format. So like I definitely didn't mind it. I always think he's usually pretty funny.
yeah. I agree. I think the fact that the Ant-Man movies are comedy superhero movies as much as anything else, the fact that he's just kind of like endlessly got a string of jokes, and yeah, to your point, like the fact that it is a cartoon this time around, it like makes way more sense in the context,
Yeah.
compared to maybe him cracking wise when like we're seeing real Paul Rudd running for his life or something like that. Um, yeah, he also cheated death, and he's like,
Yeah.
he was zombified and then restored and is now just a head in a jar. So he's having a good day. Process it however you need to process it, Scott Lang. Um, any other final thoughts on zombies before we kind of like expand it a little bit to talk about what we think the series is going to maybe wrap up with next week?
Yeah, the one thing I did want to give a shout out to too is Wasp in this episode. Like I felt like they gave her a ton of great moments, and she just gets to be badass. And I was like, that's pretty awesome because like she's already great in the MCU, but it was cool to she gets like I thought like a spotlight in this episode. It just get to be badass for like multiple different scenes, and she's almost like the one that's like in charge for like making things happen. And I was like, that's cool to see her almost like elevated to that role where she's always like a side character that doesn't get to do like too much always, you know?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. The fact that like she was there basically at ground zero, and as she kind of like she's wrestling with being the cause of all of this because obviously she was the one pushing to get her mom back. Um, like I love that. Yeah, even in this like brief little glimpse we get of her, she's grappling with all that, and we see her struggling with that. We get the nice little like interaction between her and Peter about her name being Hope, and Peter, like how does Peter still smile, and
Yeah.
like all that stuff. And then she gets that that the as soon as you see she's affected, she's gonna of course have like the hero moment of saving people before she turns. And so we get that, and we get basically her as giant man slash wasp slash woman, as a fun little like continuation, I guess, of seeing Ant-Man as Giant Man. Um, so yeah, that's a nice little bit. I like I almost wish that they didn't escape her as easily at the end there.
Yeah.
Like where she grabs them and then they just like kick the thruster on the thing. Like I wish there was a little bit more struggle there, because then it is like that extra like bittersweetness to the
Yeah.
fact that like, well, you guys knew when she like when she turned as a giant, that was going to be a problem. If not
Oh yeah.
for, you guys, then for other people. But yeah.
And especially because they still had Scott at that point, so, like, I know he's just a floating head, but they coulda came up with like, he coulda had to do something
Yeah.
too, and I'm like, that even adds in that other level,
Yeah.
where because
Um,
then he's come back and then she turned, so I was like, I didn't even realize that before, where I was like, Scott turns and then comes back, but then she turns. It's almost like this weird Romeo and Juliet thing, you know?
yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, it is very much like they're two ships passing the night, star-crossed lovers element. Yeah, absolutely. Like, because she doesn't get to see Scott like
Yep.
restored, and he only gets to see her turned. Um,
Yep.
but oh well, alas, poor Scott Lang and Hope Van Dyne. um, so yeah, looking ahead to the finale, minor spoilers for, I guess, the like potential spoilers for the finale, if anything we get is right. But where do you think this like showdown with Ultron is going to wrap up next week? Because obviously this last episode we see like the Watcher finally gets off the bench. He's now gone to that Doctor Strange, amalgamation of like horrors that we got in episode 4, um who kind of like destroyed his own universe. And we see the Watcher basically like bringing him from like trailers and stuff. We've seen that Strange interacting with like Peggy Carter and stuff like that, so that's what I think very much leads to this idea of like the next episode is going to be pulling characters from each of these other episodes for that, Avengers style shot of everybody do it like standing there in a circle. So who do you think we're gonna get in kind of the ultimate team up, and how do you think that's gonna play out? Do you think we'll defeat or they'll defeat Ultron in the next episode, or will it be like a to be continued kind of thing?
No, those are some good questions because I definitely agree with you. Where I think it's going to come down to them kind of going and assembling the Avengers out of people from different universes and trying to kind of fight this ultimate battle. But I think ultimately, I assume it'll probably end with them defeating Ultron and then kind of restoring balance to the universe. Because I think if anything, like that'll be kind of the idea of the last episode is like putting everything kind of back together, and then they can kind of continue again in season 2 and maybe do it again. I just like I don't know if with like what they would do with season 2 is like leave it open like that, where they're like, okay, Ultron's still out here terrorizing, and we need to go find like new people to try to fight him again. Which is like, I mean, they definitely can. I just think that they'll do it a little bit more like, I guess maybe I'm just hoping they give us an ending. Maybe like if they end the last
Yeah,
episode with just like setting everything up, and they're like, yeah, and come back next season. I'm like, I'm done. I'm not
yeah,
gonna watch What If next season. Like,
yeah.
but so I hope they give us like I hope they actually succeed in like taking him down and then give us that like finale we want.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think, and then the second season can be like, hey, let's check in on some of our heroes, and like, if anything, one of the things that so I watch a ton of like after each of these episodes, I watch like here are all the things you might have missed in this blah blah blah. Primarily like a shout out to Nerdist, for their
Mhm.
kind of recaps and breakdowns. And one of the things they talked about in the zombies breakdown, I think, is the idea that in the original zombies comic, like the zombies basically became like a universe ending entity because they just kept
Mhm.
getting like they just eventually turned everybody. And so then if they get into the multiverse, they can continue devouring stuff in the same way that Ultron is, continuing to destroy things. And so the idea was posed of like who would win in that showdown. And in the comics, I believe the basis is actually they team up and just destroy everything. Um, and so it's a very bleak kind of ending. And so, like, part of me is wondering if maybe like this season is they take down this immediate threat of Ultron, but they don't really resolve the zombies thing. And the zombies
Mm.
thing kind of like continues to fester in a season 2, and then they need to like come back together to solve the zombie crisis in there. I like part of me is also like, I wonder if they'll revisit that or how they'll revisit that. I mean, I'm sure if they do anything with T'Challa, they'll just recast him at this point. But
Yeah,
the idea that obviously we lost Chadwick Boseman is tragic and unfortunate. But yeah, so I think that's like the potential that's kind of like bleeding in my head is this idea of like, okay, they'll come together, they'll defeat Ultron somehow, the whatever they're doing with Arnim Zola will work, and Ultron will be taken out and the Watcher will set things in place, and then like there will be a tease, like the tease will be the end of the zombies episode that should have been of them showing up in Wakanda and Thanos getting the Mind Stone and then like turning everybody into a zombie or something like that. And like the Guardians of the Multiverse will return or something like that. Like that's the next threat they're going to have to face off next season. That's
I could definitely see that.
like that's yeah. That's the, I mean, we'll see what happens, but I could see it going that route in my
Yeah.
like speculation hat. Um, and I would not be like that. I would be okay with if they have an end to this season arc of like bringing everybody together, the Watcher stopping being the Watcher and like being a more active participant in things, and then trying to go back to being the Watcher after all of these characters now know that there's a multiverse and now like and they've helped one another or something like that, going back to their own, like it's almost an interesting parallel to like the original Avengers movie into like
Hmm.
Avengers Age of Ultron of like, okay, all these guys teamed up from all these different storylines and now they're going to go back and tell their own stories moving forward, but then they're going to have to team up again when the next big threat comes along. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. And I will be curious to see what happens. I mean, like this last episode is the one that like cemented and was like, okay, when the final episode comes out, I am going to just watch that at midnight when it comes out and just be a part of that zeitgeist and then go on and see like how other people are reacting to it on Twitter and stuff. Because it was fun. Overall series thoughts. What do you have like a favorite episode and least favorite episodes? Obviously, I think we kind of maybe have touched on the fact that like this one and the Killmonger one, because of their endings, are a little lackluster. But like, I mean, even that, like, I like almost everything else that goes on in the Killmonger episode. I just wish
Yeah.
it had a proper ending that it doesn't. But yeah, do you have a favorite episode of these that stands out to you?
I think it might be the Killmonger episode. Like, it has that ending that I just, like, definitely don't like, and it's not even because it's, like, a bad ending, it's because it just stops. It's
Yeah.
like it's like you turned off the movie and walked away. Like,
Yep.
but, like, he's one of my, like, favorite characters, and obviously he, like, in his movie, he ends up dying in this incredible scene, so, like, we didn't get more of him, but so I'm glad we're able to get more of him in this capacity,
Mm-hmm.
and I think he still is, like, awesome, like, and so I loved seeing him and Tony Stark, which was, like, another great character, but so, like, that's, like, I think as an episode, that's still, like, one of my favorites. One
I,
of the other ones,
real quick on the Killmonger,
yeah.
I love, especially like riffing off of like the fact that yeah, he dies in Black Panther, and he has that beautiful scene with Chadwick Boseman talking about like the beauty of a Wakandan sunrise. I love
Yep.
that there's a callback to that in that episode where he gets to see the sunrise with T'Chaka there alongside him after this, like after he's been a hero of this battle or whatever, and he gets like he gets to take it in the same sunrise really in a completely different light. And I thought like I was like, oh, that's like I didn't catch it the first time around, but like on a second viewing, I was like, oh, that's really cool. That he's getting kind of that the like he's getting everything that he wanted and just like failed to achieve in the movie
Mm.
here by enacting his plan some like 10 years earlier or 8 years earlier or whatever. Like it took me a little while to realize that like, oh yeah, this is just earlier in everybody's timeline. So like when I was like, why is Shuri so young? Oh, that's right,
Yeah.
because this is so much earlier in the MCU timeline of things. That's why she's a 10-year-old instead of her more aggressive teen or early 20 something or whatever. So yeah.
I also love that you get to see the mom
Oh
in
yeah,
that more,
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
she gets to be like an absolute badass
Yeah, she's
too. And I was
basically
like,
like
hell
the
yeah,
Okoye of that time. This is like before she
yeah.
steps down and retires from the Dora Milaje, and she is like the general kicking ass out there. Yeah, it was a really cool sequence as well. Yeah, love getting to see like obviously like Angela Bassett probably was not cast with that kind of stuff in mind playing that role, but getting to see her character at least be that and show that like badassery and strength is another really cool element. Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, I think that's that and the like what if T'Challa became a Star Lord are probably my favorite
Mm.
episodes. For similar reasons. Like I love Killmonger as a character, so getting to see like just how much of his like overall plan like stays the same, like the idea of like him using claw as like his pass into the thing obviously did not change, and is a great little like nod to the movie. I also love that it included Michael B Jordan's like real life love of anime of like we're gonna have like the most expensive Gundam ever or something like that. He's like, what, I like anime. I was like, that's a nice nod. um and then the like the T'Challa as Star Lord stuff. I just love like Peter like Peter Quill is such like a like a useless schlub of a guy that like somehow still makes it work. But like having a competent like character like T'Challa in that role and just seeing how like drastically that changes the universe and how like I mean the obviously the gag of like he talked Thanos out of his genocidal plan. It was a fun little nod. And I also love that they I I love over the course of this series, we haven't really touched on just like some of the incredibly small cameos that they bring in, and the fact that
Yeah.
they bring in like the original people, like in that episode, the fact that they get the guy who played Taserface to come back and be Taserface again. It's like, cool. That's great. Love that. Or the,
And they got Howard the Duck.
they got,
Like,
of course, yeah,
he's
Seth Green is Howard the Duck in multiple episodes at this point.
yep,
But like
setting up
even
for his own adventure or something, I'm sure.
somewhere down the line, yeah. But even like the news reporter from Iron Man like 1 and 2 who like Tony
Yeah.
sleeps with in Iron Man 1, like the fact that she's in like a couple of these episodes just as that character is like, that's cool. Like they didn't have to do that, but they did, and they got her to come back for it, and it's just a fun little like nod to like, oh, that's a cool little Easter egg in that episode of like they could have done a completely generic or random newscaster, but the fact that they brought in somebody that is established in the same way that like Kurt could have been just a random person who we've never met before, but the fact that they like found a random person that we have met before and decided to slot him in, and see what that dynamic is, especially his, it's a great payoff to all of his like Baba Yaga stuff in Ant-Man and the Wasp, when he ultimately falls to Scarlet Witch. Like I think there's like some brilliant casting choices in that regard. And then I'm like, again, I'm surprised that like when the Thor episode happens, I'm like, oh, they actually got Natalie Portman for that. All right, cool. like it's definitely thanks, I'm sure, to like Love and Thunder and her having like mended those wounds or whatever versus like after Thor: The Dark World, but still like a cool like, oh, like I love that like she was interested enough in this project to come back and sign on for it as opposed to a sound alike, because obviously like we don't get Scarlett Johansson, we get instead Lake Bell, who I think is doing a great job, but it's
Mm.
definitely like especially like right after Black Widow or something, it being like not quite Scarlett Johansson, is certainly a weird flavor. Um,
There,
yeah, go ahead.
there's also that the moment in the last episode where she gets that shield,
Hmm.
and then there's the moment she's using it and like firing her bracelets, and I was like, why wasn't this in Black Widow? Like this would have been a really awesome scene.
Yeah,
Like, that was me. Like that was just a thought I had where I was like, that would like because they had the red I think it was a Red Guardian
yeah, Red
or
Guardian. Yep.
whatever. Yeah. Yeah, and like I'm like she could have used his shield for like one scene. It would have been great.
Yeah,
Like
yeah. It was definitely like I think because there's also the sequence in the like the third episode that was like like crazy Hank Pym taking out all the Avengers and stuff.
yeah.
Like she I think has some really cool like sequences in that as well. Obviously, like the she basically has her own version of the Winter Soldier elevator fight where she's like
Yeah.
taking out all those people in the back of the truck. And admittedly, like some of that is very much enhanced by the fact that it's animation and they can like speed things up and do things in a more cartoony kind of light. But yeah, there's definitely been a few things where it's like, oh yeah, she got some cool moments to shine in this. But I also, I mean, to the Black Widow element, like the Black Widow, I don't even see as a Scarlett Johansson movie. It is a
Mm,
very much a passing of the torch to Florence
yeah.
Pugh's character Yelena, as like the future Black Widow of the series. So I guess I'm like ultimately I'm like okay that she didn't have like as much of cool badassery things to do in there. She does still get a few. I mean, like she definitely
Oh, yeah.
survives way more than she should in the Black Widow. um,
Yeah.
as you know, any I'm sure cinema sins I'm sure would ding it like a billion times. I don't even know if that series is still going on. I have not checked it out in many years. But yeah. Any least favorite things other than anything we've talked about so far? Like, what did you think of the Thor episode? Because I know that's one that I feel like has divided people.
I didn't hate it, like, and I didn't wouldn't even say I just like I didn't love it either. So it's kind of I'm just definitely middling where I like liked it. I obviously like I watched the whole thing. I wasn't bored. Like there is some humor and some funny things in there.
Hmm.
There is like when you like when we're talking about getting weird characters together, that's definitely an episode for just like. And I do like the idea that like I don't know if it was we needed to dedicate so much time to it, but I do like the idea that he's like a party frat boy, but he's also like popular. So like the universe comes together and like Nebula's there and the guy man, I forget his name. I can't even think of his real name now, but it's the one from Thor Ragnarok.
Surtur.
He does yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and Clancy Brown playing like who came back and played the voice of it. Yeah, that moment with like him and the Statue of Liberty is a great little bit. Yeah, love that.
Yeah,
Um,
so that's why I love that they all showed up for his party, and you know the good guys and the bad guys, and they're all like, "Yeah, of course, Thor, it's your party, bro. Like, of course we're here."
yeah, yeah. I like I get where people are frustrated on it, especially as the follow up to these two episodes that had like just
Yeah,
very abrupt or no endings. Like the fact that you then get like this, basically like an Animal House kind of movie, condensed into an episode of MCU television or something like that is not the satisfying thing that like I wonder if that episode would have been seen in a different light if it had aired earlier in the season as just like oh okay yeah, like the first episode is like here's a cool thing that could have happened with Captain Carter, here's a cool thing that could have happened with T'Challa, here's a funny story that could have happened with Thor. Like I think that's an element that I think if these episodes had been like restructured could have been interesting, because I liked it. I had a fun time with it. It definitely is like no stakes or whatever, but
yeah,
it was very much like that's a funny interpretation, and the premise being like what if Loki was like given back to the Frost Giants instead of like raised in opposition with Thor. I love that like ultimately that dynamic gives them an even better relationship. Like the fact that they weren't having this sibling rivalry, and so like when Loki shows up in like his frost giant glory or whatever, he's like seemingly menacing, but then they're like bros, brother from another mother, and like the relationship that like Odin would have loved for them to have had, I'm sure, or something in the real MCU, I think is a fun subversion for like how that could have gone, and I had a really good time with that. So yeah, like I enjoy that episode for what it is, in the mindset of this would be a fun just like one-off story if this was a pure anthology series, but as like it is, oh, these things are kind of intermingled, and I imagine that shot from the trailer that we got of like Thor basically being like, wait, but like what's going on? Not for me, I understand, but tell like for anybody who doesn't, or what, like whatever his line is kind of referring to that, I imagine that's going to be in the finale when he gets like picked up from his multiverse in with everybody else. Like that's going to be the line that triggers, like, here's the explanation. We all need you all from these different universes to face off against this, Super Ultron. Um, uh, and so, like, I almost wish like that line hadn't been teased in a trailer somewhere, because it's like, oh, now I know to expect that element, since it didn't show up in this particular episode. But yeah, it's definitely fun, and it's another one that, like a lot of these, like, there are enough touchstones to like what really happened in our universe or in the MCU universe that we know, that like when there's like a variation of that, it's like, it's a fun little thing. Like the fact that Thor and Jane still kind of end up together is a cute little, like, oh, that's a nice little payoff. And even there's one little like throwaway gag in there that I love, because Rocket shows up to that party, and in the like the Hangover inspired hotel room at the night afterwards, when Maria Hill is like antagonizing or interrogating, that's the word, Jane, you hear Thor in the background being like, "Look at this cute little bunny in the sink," as a nod to him referring to Rocket as a bunny in, what would that have been, Infinity War? Yeah,
Yeah, it must have been. Yeah.
when they meet in Infinity War. I just love it. Like, oh, that's a wonderful little like continuity thing of like, he just sees that thing and thinks it's a bunny. Cute. So yeah, like, I enjoyed that, but I also recognize why people don't like that episode. But yeah. All right. Well, yeah, go ahead.
Well, and it's like, it's not even like I think that episode is too long or has like pacing problems, but it's weird to me that like since all these episodes are at least 30 minutes, if not more, that like we do get like 30 minutes of Thor just partying and hanging out, but then like we are both here like, well, we wish we had more Killmonger and we wish we had more zombies, but they like, instead of getting 45 minutes to an hour of that, we got 30 minutes of Thor part. That's where I'm like, part of me is like,
Yeah.
I don't know if we needed to spend as much time with each character, especially if we could have spent more time developing some of these other stories. But I guess like, especially now in hindsight, we know they do have this like bigger back end plan, but then that's where I always go back to, I'm like, what if we didn't? What if we just had a bunch of cool fun episodes, you know?
What if indeed?
Yeah, for real.
So yeah, let's go ahead and throw a grade on this report card, where we grade the episode / series from A+ to F. I don't know if you have a preference on if you want to grade like just the zombies episode, or if you want to grade the series as a whole, or if they would have the same grade for you. But where do you fall on Marvel's What If?
For the series as a whole, I think I would go so far like just a B. And I think I'm aiming a little bit higher, just being a bit generous. But I mean, like I think it's like, it's definitely like a serviceable show. I'm still watching it every week, but I definitely like haven't been super into it and like addicted to needing to know like what's going to happen or what's going to go on. And because obviously, even though there is the disconnected weeks, like even as we've been getting a bigger picture thing, or thinking as we've been thinking like, oh, more's going to happen, I'm still just like, whatever. But that's why I think for me, that's like the whole thing's kind of a B.
Yeah, I'm probably right there with you, is in terms of a B, because even like even the episodes that I don't like how they end, like the zombies one here, like I still have a fun enough time with the rest of the episode, and with these, weird collections of characters that you wouldn't expect being matched up, and how they're interacting and stuff like that. It's still fulfilling on the like absurdity of the premise of like, the multiverse is infinite, so like any one thing is gonna like spin off and change everything. So like I love that we get to still see glimpses of that, even if they don't feel as complete as I wish they would sometimes. So like I have a good time with it, but if they committed one way or the other, I think is really what would give it a higher grade for me, is if it was just like pure anthology, and we're going to just, each episode's going to be its own completely self-contained story, and we're going to, go bonkers on some of these ideas, versus we're going to do that, but then we're also going to kind of sometimes occasionally pepper in like this larger story. I wish if they were going to do that option, which they did, that they had done a better job of seeding that throughout, as opposed to making it like really like like loaded in on the back half or the back few episodes of the series that are doing like a lot of the heavy lifting because they end up like they at the time left a lot of those earlier episodes feeling unfulfilling at
Yeah.
the end. So I think if they had gone like full tilt one way or the other, it would have been a higher grade for me. But the fact that they kind of did like both, but not either one as well as they could, it ends up suffering a little bit for me. So B from
And I
me
guess
as well. Yeah.
and I guess we know why they couldn't go with like the Star Wars Visions approach where they did a bunch of different like studios and did it like more anthology, like because now if everything is going to kind of culminate together, that would be some weird
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Spider-Verse level stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm like, it makes a little bit more sense, but I'm kind of with you where I wish they had just, I agree with a lot of what you said. And I wish they had just kind of dedicated like one way or the other. And honestly, what I think would have even been cooler, since we're what ifing a little bit, is that it's like, if they did the whole season and then even if they did like 2 seasons or multiple seasons of just normal anthology stuff, and then there was that happened where like a character breaks out and you get this crazy, like I feel like it would have more
Yeah.
weight
Yeah.
than this being the first season. And then we're already like, is something gonna happen? And then something happens in like the 9th episode and we're like, oh okay, like
Yeah. No, that's absolutely like, I mean, like the like thinking of something like Black Mirror, where it is
yeah.
like every episode of that series is like a unique standalone thing that doesn't tie to anything else. But then as like the series has gone on, they pepper in little like Easter eggs and hints that maybe some of these stories are loosely connected or exist in a same universe or something like that. Like I really enjoyed that. So yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. But yeah, if they had done like a season or two of this where it was just like pure, here's 18 completely unique different stories, and then like in season 3 you have like an overarching arc that gets set up of like, oh, something's starting to be amiss and we need to go back to those stories from like 2 seasons ago and pluck out some of those characters. Like if they had that kind of like forethought on this, that would have been really cool. So now I'm just mad that they didn't do that. Frank, thanks for putting that in my head. Anyway, extra credit, other suggestions if you like this one. Unsurprisingly, it is a bevy of Marvel Studios work. Namely, we have Loki, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, WandaVision, Marvel Studio Legends, which is the little series that they kind of use to like reintroduce all of the characters, like with a highlight reel before their thing comes out. You have Captain America, the First Avenger, Guardians of the Galaxy, Doctor Strange, and Avengers Infinity War. You watching anything else on Disney Plus these days, Frank?
Not really. I guess What If is the only. Oh, What If and then Star Wars Visions.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I do recommend Star Wars Visions though for everybody out there listening. I know we'll do some future episodes about that too, but that is I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, since we recorded the episode on the first 3 Star Wars Visions episodes last week, I sat down and watched the rest of the rest of them, and like, yeah, that is just a really cool series. There are a couple of them that I'm definitely like, oh, I won't remember those in like 6 months or something like that. But like I enjoyed them in the moment, and they're like, each one is like built on a really cool idea that that it's just a matter of like how invested am I in that idea and seeing like more spin out from that idea versus like, oh, that was a cool idea for a little 15-minute thing. Like I think we talked about the idea of like Tatooine Rhapsody doesn't need to be more than Tatooine Rhapsody. Like it's a cool little like 15-minute short versus something like The Duel where I was like, yeah, give me 10 episodes of that character going from like village to village and like just doing cool, badass stuff. But yeah.
I'm with you on that one. And then it was also for me, it was also episode 5, the Ninth Jedi.
Yeah, that's another good
one. Yeah,
like,
where I was like, I wish this was a series, or like I wish this was the sequel trilogy.
Yeah.
Like I was like, I wish this is what that was.
Yeah, I mean that one definitely does a great job of like introducing a cool premise for a story. That it was like, oh man, it like and the fact that one is like the longest of the batch, I think. Is like it has more time to breathe, and so it does a little bit more to like do a really cool job of setting up what this particular version of the story looks like. And so yeah, that was another one that I was like, oh, that's a really good standout that I look forward to eventually sitting down and talking about when we do Star Wars Visions Part 2 for that D Plus show. Probably sometime in November. That's pretty much what I have it penciled in for. So we will return to that. But yeah, I think that's pretty much all I've been watching on Disney Plus as well. I keep wanting to sit down and actually go back to Doogie Kamealoha after watching the first couple episodes for this show a couple weeks ago, and just haven't been able to find the time. But that was a really good one too. So definitely recommend that if you're not interested in the superhero or the Star Wars things, go check out Doogie Kamealoha. It's a real good little series that's on Disney Plus. That is going to do it for this week's episode of That D Plus Show. Thank you, Frank, for joining me to talk about Marvel's What If, and in particular, the Zombies episode here. You can follow Frank at Irrelevant Jokes. Anything you want to give a shout out to there, Frank?
Yeah. Just a quick shout out to our other podcast, That Nerdy Side Show. The most recent episode was a quick episode with you talking about some thoughts on Dear Evan Hansen. And so that was another good episode that I recommend everybody check out.
Yeah. I sat down and talked about Dear Evan Hansen and Cana Bridge of Spirits. One of those is significantly better than the other, and I'm just gonna say it's Cana Bridge of Spirits. You can very much skip Dear Evan Hansen, unless you're like a very diehard fan of like the original musical, and that's like the main reason I went. And I'm not even a diehard fan of the original musical, but I like the songs enough and am enough of a theater kid that I was like, I'm gonna go support this and check it out. And my problems with the stage version carry over into the film version. It did not suddenly change significantly. So I just don't like the plot of that movie, really, is what it comes down to. And a lot of the characters suck too. So unfortunately.
And
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I was curious about it, but I won't be watching it now.
Oh yeah, no. It is like, music's good. They cut a couple of the songs that I actually really enjoy from the show, just in trying to streamline it and stuff. But yeah, it suffers the thing that a lot of movie musicals suffer, where it just doesn't translate to the big screen very well. Like for me, I far more enjoyed In the Heights earlier this year. I thought that did a much better job of translating the original show into the film version. And unfortunately, it bombed at the box office because people weren't looking to see a musical as a summer blockbuster kind of movie or anything. So, that was disappointing, but oh well. Dear Evan Hansen also not doing well. So probably, I guess for the future of movie musicals, West Side Story later this year is probably the best hope. And it's like, that's not going to be a great one, because I'm sure it'll be fine, but I don't like that show. It's just Romeo and Juliet. That's all that one is.
I didn't know they were like redoing it.
Yeah,
from
and that's
like the old West Side Story.
Steven Spielberg is directing it. Has been working on it for like a couple of years. It was supposed to come out like last Christmas, but obviously the pandemic and stuff, so it got basically bumped to this Christmas. And yeah, it's just like, if you go and look at the trailers, it's like he's very clearly like trying to almost match the aesthetic of the original film version, but like with a few little modern cinematography kinds of things and stuff. Like, it looks like it could just be like a remastered version of an older film, in how he's shooting it. So I think it's more like he's doing it as kind of like a film exercise project for himself than anything else. But yeah, it'll be an interesting one. It's another one I will see to go and support movie musicals and stuff. I did not see Cats, because fuck Cats. I hate Cats. That is like my least favorite musical of all time anyway. And I was not going to go support the train wreck of a movie that one was. But anyway, yes, That Nerdy Site Show this week was me talking about Dear Evan Hansen and the much better Cana Bridge of Spirits. Go check out Cana Bridge of Spirits if you have PlayStation 4 or 5, because that is a fun action platformer, not 2D, 3D action platformer, a la like a Jack and Daxter kind of thing. We had Ratchet and Clank earlier this year, and it's basically that, but instead of shooting, you're doing a lot of hack and slash kind of stuff. So it's very much, fun in that vein if you like those kinds of games. And it looks gorgeous. So yeah. You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey. I will also shout out Our YouTube channel, youtube.com/thatnerdysite, where the Let's Plays that went up on Tuesday and Thursday this week were Kena Bridge of Spirits, as well as ActRaiser. I sat down in honor of ActRaiser getting a sudden surprise remaster last week. I sat down with the original version of the game, and we'll see if I end up doing like a follow-up episode on the remaster. I have not purchased it as of yet because I've heard kind of mixed things about like its art style and stuff, but
it looks a little wonky. Like I don't love the new one. Like the old one's a great game, but I don't love the way the new one looks.
Yeah. We will see. Maybe I will check it out just for the sake of a video that will get like 2 views. Anyway, you can follow all of us over at That Nerdy Site. I also will give a shout out to our Patreon early access episode that went up today as we're recording this of That Nerdy Site show. Go up to everybody at the end of October, but it features me and That Nerdy Site member Jazz Foster making her first podcast appearance in probably well over a year at this point, because we have not really had much of her on any of the pandemic era stuff just because she's been very busy and stuff. But yeah, she and I sat down and talked about some of our favorite Halloween memories and costumes and stuff like that. So you can go check that out if you support us for $1 at patreon.com/thatnerdysite, or again, that'll go live to everybody at the end of October, right in time for Halloween. Once again, if you liked what you heard, please like, rate, review, subscribe, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. And if you do feel so inclined, you can support us, as I said, on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Thank you for joining me. As always, stay nerdy, be good to each other, and class dismissed.